If you've just installed the Dreamweaver 13.1 patch, or if you're wondering whether it's worth the effort, over the next few minutes I'll give you an overview of what's new or changed in this update. There's quite a lot. One of the most significant changes becomes apparent when you turn on Live View and click a selector in the Selectors pane of the CSS Designer. You can see that we've got this blue highlighting on this H1 heading, and if I scroll down, this H2 heading is also highlighted, as are these H3 headings down here. This feature is known as Live Highlight, and it acts as a sort of reverse inspect. It highlights all the elements that are affected by a particular selector. This can be very useful if you're working with an unfamiliar page and you're not sure which elements are going to be affected by a selector. But of course, once you've identified the elements, you want to turn off this highlighting, and you do that by just clicking again. Clicking the selector in the Selectors pane just toggles the highlighting on and off. Although this live highlight has its uses, personally I find it gets in the way when you're working with a page that you're very familiar with. So you can turn it off by going to the Live View Options menu, and then there is this option here to disable Live Highlight. The keyboard shortcut Ctrl F9 is the same on both Mac and Windows. Inspect mode has also changed. Let's turn on Inspect mode by clicking the Inspect button. And as I mouse over the various elements, you get that blue highlighting around the element, and yellow highlighting indicates margins. And at the bottom left, I've got a tooltip that tells me this is an H2 element. Its width is 1200 pixels and its height is 34 pixels. In the case of margins, they're not included in the height. And if I continue moving, here we've got an element which has got purple highlighting. Purple indicates padding. And the tooltip tells me that it's an article element, that it's got the ID intro, and that its height is 260 pixels. That does include the padding. When you're in Inspect mode, Dreamweaver superimposes horizontal and vertical rulers on Live View. At the moment they're on the left and at the bottom of the document window, but if I move down here, you can see that they've moved to the left hand side and to the top. Let's just move the cursor a bit, and you can see that there are horizontal and vertical lines coming from the edge of the padding and also from the edge of the content, and these go up and across to the rulers so you can read off the position of the element. So you've now got two ways of highlighting elements in Live View to inspect the CSS. You've got Live Highlight or Reverse Inspect, which helps you to identify all elements affected by the current selector. And you've also got Inspect mode, which has been present in several versions of Dreamweaver, but it's been improved to give you more information. So let's turn off Inspect mode. Another big change becomes apparent when you select a color. Let's just select that H2 heading, and we'll select H1, H2, H3 here, and go down to the text section. We'll just toggle off that highlighting. And if I click the color box, we've now got a beautiful new color picker. You can adjust the color by using these sliders here, this one for hue, this one for lightness, and this one for alpha transparency. And this large area here is for saturation and brightness. You can also choose the color format down here, RGBA, hexadecimal or HSLA, and then this eyedropper icon will allow you to sample a color from anywhere on the screen, including outside of Dreamweaver. I'm not going to change the color, so I'll just click away. Not quite so obvious, but extremely welcome, are improvements to the whole of the CSS Designer panel. In the original release of Dreamweaver CC, the panel frequently lost focus when you changed or deleted a property, and it's now much more stable. There are a couple of small changes that I need to point out to the layout category, so let's click that layout icon there. And display, the display property was buried down at the bottom of layout. It's now up here, and box sizing has been added. Using the box sizing property and setting its value to border box has become increasingly popular because it makes it easier to calculate the width and height of an element if you're using padding or a border. Another welcome improvement is that Live View now supports percentage values for border radius. Let's just switch to this other page. And I've turned on Live View. In the original release of Dreamweaver CC, border radius worked only with pixels, so you had to calculate the actual size of the border radius if you wanted to create a circle or an ellipse. So for example, I've got this square selected and its width and height are 150 pixels. So if I go down to border radius, there it is down here, click that in the center there, I would have to set it to 75 pixels, but now I can change it to percentage and then just scrub that percentage until I get to 50 and I've got a nice circle. And if I select this rectangle here, I can set the border radius to 50% and get a nice ellipse. Many of the improvements in Dreamweaver 13.1 are due to upgrading the version of WebKit in LiveView to the Chrome embedded framework. So HTML5 form elements now work the same way in LiveView as in Chrome. Let's just quickly have a look. Turn on LiveView, and with this number field I've now got a number stepper. I've now got nice range element, and if I click on date, it gives me a pop-up calendar and I can select a particular date. The date here is shown as 22/08/2013. That's because I'm in Europe and we're following the European convention. But when the form is submitted, it doesn't matter whether you're using the American convention or the European convention. What is actually submitted is 2013/08/22. Browsers automatically convert the date to the ISO standard. You can also test HTML5 form validation directly in LiveView. Let's say if I enter in here just David instead of a proper email address and click submit, I then get an error message, please enter an email address. And if I change that to an email address, but then go into this number field and enter 50 and then click submit, this time I get an error message, value must be less than or equal to 10. That's because I've set the max attribute to 10. So I've spent a lot of time looking at LiveView, but if you prefer to work in code view, let's just go back to this page here and I'll select the CSS file and I'll just scroll down to the bottom. If I type a hash, I get code hints for all of the IDs of the page that is attached to this style sheet. And similarly, if I type a dot or a period, I get all the classes. This code hinting for classes and IDs works not only in CSS files, but also in LESS and Sass files. Another improvement in code view is current tag highlighting. Let's go to the HTML source, and if I click inside nav here, it highlights that closing nav tag, and if I scroll up, you can see that it's also highlighted the matching opening tag. If I do it with UL, it highlights both the opening UL tag and the closing UL tag. Also, the current line is highlighted more prominently. And if you use Dreamweaver CC to create PHP files, you'll be delighted to know that it now recognizes PHP 5.4 syntax. That means, for example, you no longer get a syntax error if you use the new PHP array shorthand. Last but not least, there are some significant changes in the Preferences panel. So let's just open that. It's on the Edit menu in Windows and on the Dreamweaver menu on a Mac. And in Code Coloring, there is now an option for current tag highlighting. That's this highlighting here. And you can change the highlight color. So if I click in the color box and then drag down, get a darker gray, click away and then click apply, you can see that new darker coloring has been applied. If you don't like the tag highlighting, you can turn it off by deselecting this checkbox here. Next, let's look at CSS styles. CSS prefixes, there's WebKit, Firefox and Opera. These are prefixes that are going to be used for gradients only. By default, Dreamweaver now applies the vendor-specific prefix only for WebKit. It's not needed for Firefox and Opera, but if you want to enable it, this is where you do so. And then sync settings. This synchronizes your settings with the Creative Cloud. This can be useful if you're working on two different machines, say a desktop in the office and a laptop elsewhere. By default, Dreamweaver synchronizes application preferences, site settings, keyboard shortcuts, and workspaces, but for keyboard shortcuts and workspaces to be synchronized, both machines need to be on the same operating system, and the details of what settings are actually synchronized are quite complicated, so I recommend that you click this link here to go to the help page to find out exactly what is being synchronized. The last change to preferences, and this is incredibly important, is this new Apply button. You must click Apply before clicking Close, otherwise any changes that you've made to the settings in Preferences won't be saved. Just clicking Close on its own is the same as clicking Cancel. So there you have it. There are a lot of improvements in Dreamweaver 13.1. My personal favourites are the vastly superior colour picker, support for PHP 5.4 syntax, and the fact that the CSS designer no longer constantly loses focus. For me, those alone make it well worth updating.